Hi everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time to join me for this session titled Share Your Story. I'm excited to jump right in with you all. So my name is Noemi Rodriguez. I am from the Pascack Valley Regional High School District in northern New Jersey. My contact information is there, and you're always welcome to send me an email or send me a Twitter message and let me know if you have any questions or if you want to further discuss this particular workshop. So I'm going to invite you all to pause the video now and think about what you already know about digital storytelling, what you would like to learn about digital storytelling, and hopefully today's time together will help you learn more. And then finally, we'll reflect at the end of the time together with what you actually learned. So I'm going to ask that you pause the video now and just quickly jot down some notes about what you're interested in, thinking about the K, W, and L. So we are going to continue considering today's guiding questions. So what is a digital story? How do I create a digital story? And how can you share your story? So these are really our three guiding questions to help us better understand how we can share our story and what is a digital story. So we're going to dive right in. So a digital story has a lot of different aspects to it. The great thing about it is students in a novice level, intermediate, or advanced level language class can utilize digital storytelling as a creative way to share their thoughts and share their ideas. I've mostly focused in on creating fictional stories, but there's other ways that obviously students can narrate and create a story based on different themes. So here you'll see that it encompasses reflection for deep learning, obviously student engagement, since they're the ones really leading all of this work. There's tons of technology integration, and of course it is considered project-based learning. So the key elements, or the 7 elements of a digital story, are as follows. We have the author's point of view, a dramatic question that's going to keep the audience engaged throughout, the emotional content. So if you think about what potentially your students are interested in or what your students maybe feel passionate about, that emotional content, if that comes to life, again, that's another really great way to hook whomever their audience is. So you want to consider who the audience is as well, obviously, of the story. Gift of voice is really important. So as students narrate the story, you can hear the voice, their intonation, and how that comes through. The power of sound. If a student wants to incorporate different sound effects or music throughout the story, that's also really gripping and hooking for the audience to have music throughout as well. The economy, whether or not there's enough in the story, so that way we can understand the beginning, middle, and end. And there's typically, especially in a fictional story, a problem resolution and potentially rising action with maybe a conflict in mind, and then of course, hopefully some sort of resolution with the conclusion of the story. And then of course the pacing as well. So with economy, is there too much, too little? So is it just enough to really get the story across? And the pacing, is it appropriately paced for your audience to really interpret the story and get a good sense of what's happening in each aspect? I'm going to, again, encourage you to pause the video and to check out some of these student examples so that way you can see what some of these stories are like. So I have used, in my experience, Google Slides, Microsoft PowerPoint, a software program called Frames, and most recently a program called Book Creator. But really anything that involves a multimedia platform where you can combine audio, visual components, and some sort of text, right? So that way students can read along the story as they hear it narrated. Those aspects are important. So really any technology tool that you feel could encompass all of this would be appropriate for this digital story project. So I encourage you now again to pause the video, click on the Book Creator or the Frames examples, and you'll be able to see what some students have created. These were some examples of students' work from this past school year, and we focused on going on an adventure, and we were focusing on different community vocabulary. So everyone had to have a main character go on an adventure, and of course I modeled with my own digital story. I involved some video, some still images, but that way the students were able to see a video, they were able to see a story first that I created, and they could see very well, okay, this is what Mrs. Rodriguez is expecting. And then they went ahead and developed their own with obviously the guidelines that I provided. So again, just pause the video now, check out some of these links, and I'll meet you right back here in just a moment. Moving on to how we create a digital story. So now we've seen what a digital story looks like at the final stages, but we want to work backwards and think about how we have students find their stories, tell their stories, create, and of course, share their stories. So here, if the story is your central element, think about which curricular goals you have. As I was sharing before, we were talking all about communities and cultures, and we were talking about different places around the town, which is why we created a story all about the adventure of a particular fictional character. The media that you're using, so what access do you have to technology in your district? The process, how long do you anticipate this would take? When do you plan to set this forward? And then finally, what types of programs do you have available for your students? So these are all good questions to consider before diving in. So I've just provided some guidelines here in terms of where do I start or what do I do first. So what is your objective? Obviously, we're looking for the students to express themselves in the target language, to work collaboratively together, to perhaps have some creative outlet with this story, which is always fun. So I put together story requirements as well as a rubric sheet, so that way the students know in advance what the expectations are for what to do. A timeline or an estimated timeline is also helpful. Could they potentially spend 3 class periods working on this, 4 class periods, 5 class periods? Everybody obviously has a different schedule. We dedicated a week that we were doing state testing to in-class time to working on our stories, and I tried to keep everything in class. That way it didn't feel like a heavy lift for students outside of the classroom setting, and I was able to hands-on help them out if they had any sort of technology issues, or maybe when they were co-creating their stories, any sort of editing and revising, I was also there to assist. So with who's working together, do you want to predetermine the groups of students? Do you want them to choose? Do you want them to work as partners, as groups of 3, perhaps an individual project? I will say that an individual project is a lot sometimes, especially for our novice students. So I appreciate when students are able to work together well. And I've set it up in the past where I allow the students to pick 2 group members that they would like to work with, and then I'll arrange the groups. I've done that as well, and it seems like a nice way for me to have a little bit of say in who gets to work with who, knowing that obviously we want them to do their best work and to work with peers that they work well with. And then, of course, where are you setting up this project? Are you able to do it in your classroom? Do students have access to technology in your classroom, or do you have to go somewhere else in your building? So with finding your story, as I shared with you before, you want to go ahead and assign your groups. Just as I did with you all today, discuss the 7 elements so that way the students have a framework or a general idea of what a digital story is, and of course some examples to look at, maybe some model examples that you want to share. The students should see in advance what the requirements are and understand really what the expectations are. That's why the rubric also comes in handy. And then the students, once they're grouped together, they begin to brainstorm and to begin to create a storyboard template. So think about who their main character is, some background information for their main character, what sort of conflict resolution might take place, and of course how they can weave in pertinent vocabulary and structures that perhaps have to do with this unit of study that you're doing right now. With students telling their story, you want to make sure that they feel comfortable using the technology. We don't want to set them up for failure. So if you have to backwards plan a little bit with incorporating some aspects of, let's say, Book Creator or Google Slides, maybe some practice ahead of time so that way when they dive into this project, they feel a little bit more comfortable. As I shared with you earlier, the individual storyboard of the students and then a larger storyboard is also a helpful way to help organize everyone's ideas. I've also implemented Writer's Workshop, and if you click here on this link, it'll lead you to a presentation all about Writer's Workshop and the different steps, so you can certainly have the students draft, revise, edit, and then of course hopefully celebrate and share their stories in the future as part of the Writer's Workshop model. I've set up as well digital folders for the students so they can keep everything organized, or you can have them set up a folder and then share it with you as well. But this is also with a checklist in mind, that they are going forward and making sure that as they go through each stage, they're able to accomplish all of the necessary tasks in their groups. Sharing the story is by far, I think, everyone's favorite part. So students, once they develop their solid storyboard and they think, great, I have this great story that I'm ready to type out and I'm ready to put it into action, put it into one of these programs. These are some basic steps in terms of how we want the students to go ahead and write their story, record their story, listen to their story. And this is also too where you may see students recreating some things or re-recording just because they want to make sure that it's exactly the way they want it to sound or exactly how they want it to be seen. So I have students with the revision and editing stage once we're at that point. So we feel like we have a really solid story. Now we're ready to add the images. Now we're ready to add the backgrounds and the sounds and the narration and to type everything up as well. So students like to add speech bubbles sometimes. They like to maybe move some things around on the screen so we have some visual effects. Student voice for narration is really important. I like to break it up so we hear one student's voice in the beginning, another student's voice in the middle, and then finally another student's voice at the end. Music and sound effects, as I shared before, it can be really effective as well to keep the audience engaged. The students should continue to refer to their checklist and also the rubric as they start to finalize their visual creation of the story and also their narration. They can also have another group perhaps view their story and give them some feedback before they submit it to you as their teacher. And I do also appreciate having the students reflect about how they think they did, whether or not they were on task, if they felt like they met all of the elements and more, and what they got out of the experience. If they were to do it again, would they do it the same or would they do it differently? So the reflection component, even throughout the different stages of the digital story process, it's always nice at the end for students to take a few moments. And with the novice level students, I have them reflect in English, so just so then hopefully they're processing and really thinking about all the different ways that they collaborated, but then potentially what they would do in the future if they were given this project again in the future. With sharing the stories, this is also very celebratory. I like to set up a class period where we watch everybody's stories. They have a document that they write down, different aspects of the stories. We'll have an open note quiz potentially in the future. I've also had it where we have a class vote, the most creative, the most original, the funniest story. I've also celebrated with whoever the class winner is. The students will get a pizza party. We've gone to Board of Education meetings and maybe highlighted a story or two in front of the Board of Education. So that way the students can also feel empowered, like they created this wonderful story and they actually have an audience. We've also done collaboration with the elementary schools. So in the past, I've had 8th grade students work with 1st grade students, teach them how to create a digital story, and then they've co-authored stories at the elementary level on very simple topics. So it's been nice to see the older students mentor the younger students with this project in mind. Additional resources, of course, everything that I shared with you today, anything that I've created for my students, I put in this Google folder, so you're welcome to take it, make a copy, and then edit it however you wish. And again, as I shared with you, some examples of some tools that are out there for you to check out if you're looking to do this. So now I invite you to pause the video again and think about what you potentially learned, hopefully learned from our time together. And as I shared with you before, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. I know I tried to keep this as brief as possible with some pausing, but again, I'm sure there might be a question or two that spring up. Feel free to shoot me an email or send me a message on Twitter, and I'd be happy to correspond and continue the discussion with you. I wish you all the very best in sharing your stories, and I hope you try this out with your students in the future. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.